Good evening. I'm going to call to order the Brattleboro Planning Commission meeting for Monday, July 6th, 2015. First order of business is to approve the minutes from the June 1st meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Minutes are passed. Any announcements? Rod or Sue? Okay. Any public comment that's not associated with the agenda? Okay. So the first item is the draft land use regulations work session. I know we have some members of the public who would like to comment on that, and we'll begin shortly. It's my understanding that we have just received a group of comments, and there were also some comments from Mr. Stevens, a zoning chart and the map.
Are these the same ones that were in our email?
The zoning chart and the map was in your email. The other ones are new to you tonight.
Okay, thank you.
And there were also some comments made at the select board meeting last week. So what we've done is we have about an hour allotted on tonight's agenda for your comments, and please feel free to make those comments. And the commission, we only have 4 out of the 7 members this evening, so the commission will hear your comments. They need more time to ponder them before we make any decisions, but we are eager to hear your comments, so whichever one of you wants to represent the group, please do so.
I'm wondering if it would be better if we sit there, because this is being mic'd through the cameras. Is that right? Or can we just speak from here?
There's a microphone here.
The mic next to you.
Yeah, we may be talking for a while, so maybe we'll move up to the table and sit, if that's okay. Maybe we take the whole group up there. Sorry, we get it.
Is that mic on the table? Okay.
I'm Bob Stevens with Stevens and Associates. Monroe, you want to continue?
Monroe Whitaker, retired.
Robin Sweetapple.
Peter Bowman, SVE Associates.
Don Duckland Martin, I'm Craig Miskovich.
So I thought what I was saying by way of introduction, we've taken and sort of gone through the draft that we had to sort of issue comments. We probably had not prepared as well as we would have liked to communicate those comments, so I'll apologize ahead of time. Monroe's done a great job on Chapter 3, so we thought maybe we could review what we had for observations on the chart and the map, go to Chapter 3, and then we'll have to go back to 2 and 4 if we have time tonight, or if not, perhaps we can get a second audience and then maybe prepare a little further for those comments. I would sort of just say that a lot of these are things that we look in the context of either projects we've done or case studies, and again, just we're trying to be as constructive as possible. So where do we want to start? We want to start on the map. Does that make sense? If people have a copy of what we did is we took a copy of the proposed zoning ordinance and marked it up with some comments. And again, these are, help me out, this goes back 3 months for our group to say what it is we had in mind when we put these things down.
Well, maybe I can interject just for a second. I think that one of the
Keep going.
foundations for our comments and some concerns with respect to the map and uses is that although the zoning ordinance adequately identifies any current use which is made a non-conforming use under the zoning ordinance, as it's required to do by the enabling statute, I don't know that we fully appreciate or maybe fully understand how many uses that we are making non-conforming in our community. And changing from a conforming use to a non-conforming use, even though it's allowed to persist, has its consequences. It is more difficult to obtain financing for any sort of non-conforming use in a district. It is difficult, if not impossible, to expand if the business is doing well and wants to add some level of use that would be considered non-conforming, or an expansion in its pre-existing non-conforming use. So as we go through the uses, just want to make note that we understand that pre-existing non-conforming uses will be allowed to persist, but there are consequences to being such.
Okay, so if you want to take a look at that map, and again, so we've sort of color-coded and tried to put comments. This one actually is fairly sort of self-explanatory, I think. Let me just start with West Brattleboro, and the reason why we were suggesting adding some additional properties in the RN district and then in the RR district. One of the things that occurred to us in looking at RN, which is principally your residential district, is that there was little to no room to grow. I mean, a lot of these areas are already built out. Under the PUD, I think the traditional neighborhood design is limited to, or doesn't go into the RR district. I don't know that you'd have any parcels large enough to aggregate to actually do a PUD in what's currently zoned. And then some of these lots, if you go to West Brattleboro, for instance, you'll see there's 2 lots that are labeled, that are colored in a different yellow. What we're suggesting is that might be value to the town to zone those for RN. Those are actually Drew and Locke parcels, which have conceptual designs on them for fairly high-density residential developments. It's adjacent to municipal water and sewer. It's close by, so there's infrastructure for those properties. I think that we've got some conceptual designs, 20 to 40 housing units on them. I can't remember what the proposed map had. Maybe it was RR, but it would be substantial reduction in the capacity for growth if you ever had a demand for that. I'm not sure there's a demand, but that was the thought. Same thing, moving closer to town, next to the VC, there's a couple of properties that we're familiar with around the park. The Brookside parcel, there's a 5-acre plateau that currently has a PUD. I think the PUD would still be grandfathered in. That's got 100 units on it, about 15 units per acre. So these properties are sort of adjacent to existing RN or other neighborhood centers that have, some of them are, have some topographic restraints to get up onto them, but they have the capacity to expand municipal water and sewer and transportation. So the infrastructure is there, perhaps for some higher density development. Also, sort of staying in West Brattleboro, I think we were suggesting that to transition sort of in almost the concept of transect, which we've heard about out there, that you might see a transition from a higher density neighborhood center to the RN than to rural residential before going to rural. Again, we don't have a lot of resource mapping for that, but it seemed to jump right from RN to rural was a sort of an abrupt transition. And usually you think about these things stepping down as you get further away. Is this a proposed change in West Brattleboro? I can't remember. I don't know whether you guys drafted that or if we were saying that we thought
We don't know what you're pointing to.
I was pointing to Monroe to point, really the area around Chelsea Royal and is that currently proposed for a neighborhood center under the old district?
No, that's
We were
proposed rural business.
Rural business,
So you must be.
Yeah, we were suggesting it might work as a neighborhood center. And again, it's just a concept, but one of the things about a neighborhood center is that this has enough residential density within a pedestrian shed to be viable as a pedestrian center. Because there's a lot of housing out there now. Between the Tri-Park and Westgate and Sherwood Hollow, you've got several hundred housing units. So, and it is kind of a gateway coming into the town. You come down to the bottom of the hill. So it's you have this neighborhood center zone, which we thought was a great idea, and thought that perhaps that made sense to look at that area a little differently because it might work as a pedestrian center and become a sort of a nodal place. Obviously,
Can I just, sorry.
Yeah.
Can we jump in and ask questions?
Yes.
So when you were thinking of that, the area that's mapped here, what is defining the boundaries for you? Like why those particular parcels?
So that's a good question, and I'm trying to remember what is defining those parcels. I think it's the current, so the Chelsea Royal on the north side, there's an apartment, a multifamily apartment building on the south, on the western extent. So there's an 18 or 20 unit apartment building on the south side of that. And then you get into sort of really a auto-oriented bunch of sort of development up there that's there now. The rental place, the former state barracks, the
It's Detman Drive.
Yeah,
It's the eastern boundary.
Detman Drive to Sunset Lake Road, basically.
Detman Drive on the north side. And is that parcel on the south the one that has the, I think that's the one that's got the apartment building on it,
Yes.
on the south side on the
I thought
west.
it was
No, that would-
But the eastern extremity on the south side, is that the storage unit, the mini, the
On the,
self-storage facility with the tarot card reading store in the front?
right, I think it
I
is.
think that's what it is.
Yeah, sort of, it's commercial in use, and then you get to the entrance of, on the other extent is the beginning of the Tri-Park section. And some of that land, actually, I was gonna say, some of that land is constrained from resource, but I'm not sure it is up on the front. Actually, that lot next to Chelsea Royal, I think, is actually buildable, So yeah, it's, anyway, those were, they're not good hard boundaries, but.
And there's no little arrow for that, you're just
Right,
telling
we left
us.
off the arrow, it looks like.
Okay,
Yeah,
just
sorry.
checking.
Yeah,
Okay, so there's some floodplain issues probably on the northern side of
Could be.
Route 9, on the, between Detman Drive and the Chelsea Royal.
Yeah.
Or
It doesn't go all the way out to Route 9 on all traffic.
I don't think it does either. yeah.
It's more in front of the Mountain Park. It's-
Right,
That
right.
flat area is probably going to be an issue, but that's about it.
And what is that? Is that VC on the original
No,
maps?
it's
No,
rural.
That's,
It's rural
okay,
business.
our color ended up messing up there. That's the rest is our rural business, I think.
Right.
We didn't
What's
didn't
the
intend to
dis-
change that.
What's the distinction from rural business to village center that you aim to achieve?
Or to neighborhood
I mean,
center.
I'm sorry, neighborhood center.
Form, really. We were looking at that as pedestrian, the potential for pedestrian orientation at that node. And again, the logic was, and I don't know, whether, we don't know that we have a strong reason for where you start one and stop the other, but in many cases, like further down in the rural business, where you get towards the, where the liquor store is and the other businesses, there's no corresponding residential density behind it.
Right.
So up in this area, you have a lot of housing that could walk down into that. And when you get further down to where the lumberyard is and the rest of that, you're in an area where the topographic sort of constraints and the resource constraints really doesn't have that supporting residential area to make it. There's no housing density within the walking shed, I think is why we thought there was a difference.
There's no there.
There's no there, yeah.
One thing that I would add here also is that as we looked at the other areas along Canal Street and Putney Road, where we had both of those two districts, we're making a suggestion on Canal Street, but if we go to Putney Road, what pops out at us is that the SC, which is more of an automobile and perhaps interstate-oriented group of businesses, whereas the neighborhood, the NC is closer to residential areas to the south and to the downtown, and we're geared towards local uses that would primarily, that local people would primarily support as opposed to the traveling public. And we saw something similar here because we have large groups of populations away from what we're proposing as a village center here, that I think there are potentially almost 2,000 people within walking distance there. That would make sense to, as uses to serve those people, whereas the intermediate stretch, as Bob mentioned, there is no supporting population base, so it will probably be serving people in an automobile. So we saw the potential there for two different types of commercial districts, and that's why we're putting it out to you for your consideration.
So I have a question, and I'm relatively new to town, so I have to ask these things. Who owns the property, I think you have highlighted, that's just south of the proposed change that you want to make, just south of the proposed additional?
Which color, which zone?
This is the yellow?
The yellow. Those two lots.
This is the one with the 30 and 60 unit.
Yeah. They used to be owned by the westernmost was owned by a family by the name of Locke, and the eastern was Drew. We always refer to them as the Locke-Drew parcels. They've been under contract for sale a couple of times. I don't know who owns it currently, but it's basically that if you go to the New England House and you look at that, there's a steep bank behind New England House. At the top of that steep bank is a flat plateau of sands and gravels. And that's the plateau. The green area, actually, I recall now, that green area we've got zoned, we're suggesting rural residential is actually conserved land. Now that I remember, that's part of the Abbott Farm Road conserved farmland, so actually that'll never get developed anyway. But up to that yellow, up to that green boundary is very buildable land for decent sized density.
Okay. And what's a Mather property?
Mather property is another, there's a field that yellow encompasses, which is adjacent to other sort of reasonably dense residential neighborhoods that has the potential to be, developed for higher density housing. And it's adjacent to an existing, housing density. So again, it's some ability to expand. That it's currently hayed. It was owned by a group of neighbors for many years. And that fell apart after 20 or 30 years. I don't know what the status of it is now. We've looked at it for ball fields and different things over the years.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're traveling with these comments west to east?
Yes. If we drop on down south on the Guilford Street Extension section of yellow, that is simply because those areas are served by sewer. So we were looking for places that could support higher density development. The sewer line runs all the way out to the end of that yellow. It's poorly developed now, but it's fairly small lots now too, so don't feel all that strongly about it. Although I will say that a bunch of that yellow to the east side of the road was part of a cottage concept design where we had 12 units sitting out there, and if it's RR, that probably isn't going to work, and it does have municipal sewer capacity. So anyway.
Are you talking about the chunk that's on Orchard Street?
No, Guilford. Sorry, I don't have a big map to show you.
No, I know, it's a little hard navigating.
So if you look down on the southern end of the map and the westernmost section of the new yellow.
You mean that?
No, I'm down here.
You're talking about that? Okay. All right, sorry.
That's okay.
And what were you saying?
Those lands have municipal sewer. So
Okay.
that's really the only distinction. A lot of the land on the east side of it is constrained by wetlands. Some on the west is slopes, but they're already small lots, and then there's some development capacity on the Owens property, which is the large one on the east. So if that makes sense. So again, those were areas that we were sort of looking to say, is there room along the edges where we have municipal infrastructure where we could allow higher density development to occur in the future? So that was really the thought, that capture that.
And then
Do you want to show those other two spaces in the RN, rural neighborhood?
The other two spaces, what are you referring to?
Down here where it was rural residential next to the industrial, because I believe
Right.
that was one, that way we finish
Sure,
residential.
finish RN, okay. So the last two new RN that we were suggesting, one was, I want to say Guilford Road, but it's South Main Street, isn't it? South Main Street, across from Familari's Field. That has municipal water and sewer as well, ran down there for the Welcome Center. There's a lot of sort of small cut-up development towards the outer end of that. A lot of steep slopes, but again, thought that it had the capacity for higher density development because of the infrastructure. And then the last one is a section I think is currently zoned water resource Somebody told me the name of that street. I can't remember the name of that street.
You're talking about off Putney Road?
Yes.
Like by the,
Eaton Avenue.
Eaton Avenue.
Yes, Eaton Avenue. Again, not, so it's up topographically, it's probably fully developed, and it's not, those lots are up high, so they don't really relate to the water. I don't know, I don't have strong feelings about that, but I think we were thinking that it was better suited as RN, if that makes sense. Did I cover everything?
Yes.
All right, okay. Let's go back, sorry to jump around, but just to try to recall what we were thinking. If you go to the top of the page.
Before we move on, I'm just curious. Out of all these suggestions, are there some of them you think are particularly more important?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that I would say that there's known value. A lot of those West Brattleboro sites, we know are buildable, that when the market demand comes back, that's probably where we've been looking at that spot for 20 years for affordable housing and private developers. Nobody's been able to make a go of it. So those areas seem like they're, we know that there's development capacity and long-term probably demand for that and supporting infrastructure. I think that the Guilford Street properties are not, I don't feel as strongly about that, or the South Main Street properties, mostly because those also have a lot of resource constraints when you get right down to it. I don't know that you're going to get a lot of density in that when you take out buildable land for other reasons. And I would say that on the one off Putney Road, that's all developed except for that one lot where Mike LaCroix was trying to, or maybe it was Chris Long was trying to do a redevelopment into condos on the one
I think
overlooking
the
water.
idea there is just makes it more what it is. Basically, it's more RN than it is anything else, and it probably should be RN.
It's probably all those neighborhoods are RN now, and so that group of homeowners they're all built out. That group of homeowners are going to be in a different zone, and I'm not sure they would understand why. Because again, they relate to the street, they're up high, they do overlook the water, but the water's a long way away, so.
Whetstone Village we might bring up now too, because that's a similar situation to that one.
And again, Whetstone Village is fully built out. You're never going to see any change there. Does everybody know where that is? Whetstone Village is off of William Street. It's in the WR district now. And it's just a tiny little circle with a bunch of houses stuck in it, and it's up at a high elevation. It's not next to the brook. So again, we thought that probably was more like RN than WR. But I don't see it's not one that is that big a deal to us because it's probably never going to change. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Going back, why don't we go back to the top of the page, get some of the easy ones off. The World Learning and the institutional district, they own a piece of property on the east side of Kipling Road, which has got has classrooms in it. It's got conceptual designs for a bunch of campus stuff. And we thought that was more appropriate to stay IT than to be RR.
I think it's currently part of their plan unit development too, and their master plan for the plan unit development.
Yeah, portions of it are ponds and other fields, but yeah, it's definitely campus, part of their campus. So that was what we were trying to point out there. There's a little sliver of IN that on the other side of the railroad tracks. Again, don't feel strongly about it, but I think this is a really nice, it makes logical sense to us to have more industrial, and there was a little piece of RR in there. So again, not one we feel strongly about, but we thought it was more cohesive. The upper plateau that Win Stanley owns down off of behind New Chapter is currently WR district. Currently, it's going to be full of solar panels soon, and was actually designed at one time for residential development, a fairly dense residential development. But again, based on topography, I mean, it is adjacent to the water resource, but based on topography, we felt it related more to the SC district. And so suggesting that was a more appropriate zoning.
That's not all going to be. That's the other thing there is I don't think, Bob, that is going to be all solar.
Half of it solar.
One of the three parcels is in process now, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the one that we walked that time
Yeah.
in the winter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's probably true. About half of it. Well.
So there's three, you divided it roughly into three 3-acre parcels, right?
That's
Each
correct.
translates to either the maximum or minimum for a particular piece of Section 248.
And, you know, the WR district seems like it has a lot of flexibility and different uses in it. It just, and so I can't say personally I recall. I know we looked at it, but it was,
High-density residential is not one of those, though.
I see.
And that's,
And again, it was more back to the purpose statement, you know, water-related. Didn't seem like that one was water-related. Although we did suggest, Monroe was adamant that we included the ribbon on the West Brook that is the bike path and any land associated with it that is water-related up the Whetstone. There is some land on the other side that's not easy to get to, but it's probably is appropriate. It's part of the bike path. It's related to the West River. It seemed like that was a logical, but it's a very small kind of piece of zoning too, so you can take a look at that concept. The professional center at Route 30, we sort of struggled with that one because it does seem to be out in the middle of an RR district, and but it is existing light industrial, it's existing office space. I can't remember what was the last zoning. It was WR district. Again, topographically it relates to Route 30, and its existence seemed to be more rural business. So we struggled with a good recommendation on that for you, or concept, but it felt odd to be WR. That's why we brought it up. It just didn't seem like that was the right fit. And there's a lot of things going on there. I mean, we have a distillery, an artisan, place, Green Mountain Power, all those sort of uses that I don't know. Anybody recall whether those would be conforming under WR, or does everything become
I don't think
non-conforming?
everything was conforming. I think offices were allowed in WR, but I think that was probably the only thing. Is that correct?
The distillery would be, the
Oh.
artisan would be, I'm not sure about the Green Mountain Power.
Yeah, to the utility, it was
It may be.
it was just a show of a
Yeah.
shrub. It is what it is. No
Right.
problem.
It's an odd area in town. It's there, it's existing, it's kind of light industrial buildings, but there
The
isn't a good
expectation
zone.
was to move with the form and the scale and allow basically the set of uses that are there, but
Mm.
protected against potentially a gas station, which under the existing zoning would be permissible.
Oh.
No, it's not.
I'm sorry. Well, no, I'm
It's
sorry.
not,
let me-
it's commercial office right now. It
Right.
Couldn't have a gas
If we
station,
made
but
it
if it would be
RB,
commercial business.
would allow gas stations.
We'd allow-
Fair
Yeah,
enough.
exactly. So
Yeah.
the other categories that we had to choose from were less appealing.
Yeah.
right?
Seems like an odd
That's what
area.
we were working with.
Well, we concede it's odd, so that we struggled with that as well.
Yeah, it is odd.
Yeah. All right, so moving down, so as you can see, some of these areas, I think, we felt more strongly about than others, but the IT district, so the retreat lands, there was an island of RR in the middle of IT and RN that is part of the retreat property. It's got the tower on it, it's all park.
We've changed that, Bob.
You have?
We did
Okay.
put that into IT.
Okay.
That little knot, yeah.
Yeah, so going south of the urban center, so this is an interesting area. This is now where Marlboro College is, the bridge is gonna go across. We really felt like there was a potential for additional urban center. So you think about Marlboro College as a 5-story building down there, and there's a parking lot next to that. There's a bridge going through at some point in the future and some other remaining land. That land is geographically separated from South Main Street by a fairly steep ledge, so it doesn't relate, or I should say, it could relate to the urban center. We could see, we did build a 5-story building down there. It seems like you could build in the form of an urban center, and it might have the potential for some expansion and future growth. There was a couple of studies that were done. There's the downtown, it's not a master plan, it was the character areas of the downtown district several years ago that really identified that whole waterfront area as a character different than some of the urban center and some of the more institutional areas in the urban center. But potential, So again, just for your consideration, we think that there may be some value to think about that in a higher density form. Further out, it turns to really industrial in terms of what's on the elevation of that road. So you could certainly put some bigger buildings down there without too much trouble.
Where is the bridge going to intersect? I'm sorry.
As it's currently proposed, it'll just touch the southeastern extremity of the island that you see in the map there, the white space in the middle of the Connecticut River.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it will land at the very end of the existing Marlboro Graduate Center parking lot and basically take out the brick building immediately to the south, the old Neil Smith building.
Yeah. And when that building comes down, there'll be something left to build on there.
Right,
Um,
further
and-
south, you mean?
To the south
Yes.
and in the parking lot. We've looked at structured parking and new buildings out there over the years, and
Right.
so that's the concept.
And then
That's-
the question is how much land the bridge will take
Yeah.
on the Depot Street side because of the tank farm needing, it's an unresolved question, I think, at this point to say how much of that land will be taken as part of the bridge project because of the conflict between a bridge that acts as an overpass and the above ground storage tanks, which constitute kind of a hazard.
The town owns a spit of land north of that, right alongside of the river. And that would be north of where the bridge would land, correct?
Just a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, separated by, 300 feet.
Since the January meeting, we had put that into the Water and Recreation,
Oh.
which
It's-
since has now been renamed the Waterfront.
Actually, it's split a little more. I mean, we did bring a little more urban center down there, I think, than was before, a little bit more along 142. We put some in the waterfront as well.
So
So there's
the-
been some adjustments down there in that southern portion.
On
We'll have
the
to look at the new.
west side of the tracks is urban center, and on the east side, water resource?
Yeah, basically.
That would make sense, it
Yep.
seems, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to get a grasp of what's really going to play out there.
I know.
Just because it's hard to imagine.
That's why we want to talk about PUDs.
Yeah, it's okay, but it's hard to imagine exactly
Yeah.
the extreme, not this, the size of the actual bridge is pretty easy to figure out.
Yeah, there's a drawing, there's a
How
design.
much land they're gonna wanna take to
The
preserve
landing.
the, lack of that, the buffer around the bridge, I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
Because there's definitely been conversations about federal standards and the exposure of the above ground storage tanks.
Yeah, the tanks have to go. We always thought Barrows was out of there, and that's going to open up that land for redevelopment. And some of that is low-lying, it's floodplains, it probably
Yeah.
ought to be park. And
Right.
some of it could be redeveloped, but scale of that,
And then
not
what is
necessarily.
exactly what scale and then what orientation the buildings have.
And that's, the nice thing about, but again, there, and that one, at least, there's a clear, that ledge wall gives you a clear difference in character from below and above. So, yeah, so there's some, as I say, there's some potential. There's been some plans over the years to look at larger buildings down there. So if you want to, it sounds like you've already looked at it once.
Yeah.
So moving on, going down up Canal Street, and I suspect you guys struggled with this as well. The MU district seemed like a good sort of transition from urban center to, along these arterials. I would say that, you start thinking about, well, where's a good boundary to start one and stop another? And we were going through in our mind, looking at this, saying, well, yeah, Gougers is in that one, and then you've got, a bunch of lawyers in this one, and I don't know, when we looked at it from a coherent standpoint, we weren't sure why to stop and start the way the map that we had was starting and stopping, and in the end, thought it made more sense to really look at that corridor as the MU district. We like the sense that it seems to be geared more towards pedestrian-oriented in terms of form, and has a mixed-use quality. I think the MU district has, and I think you mentioned this, Rod, in your discussion with the select board, that one of the things, as some of us who work downtown have, we've begun to be, well, I should say, we're disappointed that if we want to have our car worked on now, we have to somehow bring it to Putney Road and get a ride into town. There used to be repair places where you could just leave your car and walk to work and pick it up after work. And with the MU district would seem like a good spot to allow that. And I understand, it's not, if it's meant to be pedestrian oriented, I think we'd throw out for you guys to see if to consider allowing auto repair and trying to control form in some way. I mean, certainly if you can build it in a way that has a form that is not violating what you're trying to accomplish in terms of the public realm, that'd be great. Because right now, there's a whole bunch of people that live and work downtown that would really like to be able to get their cars serviced and not have to figure out transportation. Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I go to Brattleboro Tire because they have a taxi, but
Right.
literally, it used to be you could just bring it down the hill and leave it and walk. So that would be useful. So we're almost there, I think, on our comments. A couple of others. The exit 1 area, you guys had proposed SC on the version we had. We really wanted to suggest reconsidering that for NC. We think we know why you had SC, because you feel like you need a gas station there, but the character of that is potentially still pedestrian and could stay pedestrian, and we were concerned that if you make it SC, we're going to see transitions there that go in the other direction, and in some ways we'd rather allow a gas station and play with the form. Again, if you can let a gas station come into there and regulate how the form works. Somebody brought an image to the select board the other night with a gas station that was just okay. So it can be done. We know you can do it. It's just hard to regulate that.
The current draft does have gas stations as a conditional use in the neighborhood.
Oh, it does?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, oh great.
That, I think it was changed from
Yeah.
the draft you were looking at.
So you guys must have been looking at a January
Could be.
edition?
We've been looking at it since January, honestly. It's taken.
Actually, just, I think February 26th, if I remember, was the date when you presented it to us, Brandy. And
Yeah.
the following Wednesday, we started meeting. We've met every Wednesday since.
But we're slow.
The draft that we presented at those meetings was the January 17th draft. We haven't,
Yeah.
you guys have gotten the new draft. We haven't posted it online because we've been
Working on it.
working. And
Yeah.
so until there's another clean draft, we haven't really
Yeah.
distributed it.
So that's just about it for the map. There's two other things. One, there was an isolated piece of land that Austin owns between it and Delta Business Campus that just seemed, it was RR. It seemed like it would be better to go as part of the campus because it is part of their campus master plan. Maybe that's already been changed. That's the IT at the end of Austin. And then we changed Paul's Road back to RR from industrial, although I'm tempted to reverse that suggestion. It's just topographically challenged property and resource challenged property, but half of Delta is topographically challenged too. And I don't know, we've been talking to some of the residents out there. They don't really think there's any potential for it to stay residential. So maybe it makes sense to leave it as industrial and ignore that comment. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
I agree.
So just to be clear, so the gray segment, I'm looking at your map, Bob.
Yeah.
The dark gray segment that you show as being part of the Austin campus.
Yep.
You want that to just become IT and then leave the rest
Alone.
alone?
Yeah.
According to our, so our map shows the underlying zoning becoming industrial and basically going down to the,
All the way down to the state town line, I think.
right,
Yeah.
yes, it does.
Yeah. And that seems like, yeah,
There's a tiny
that's,
little slice of green for rural residential along Route 5. On
right,
the east side. of Route
right.
5.
And that is residential at Chicken
Yeah,
Coop
Residential
Hill.
now, it's fairly isolated and separate. I don't,
Topographically, it is different.
topographically, it's really a little
Yeah.
disjointed from the rest, so.
I mean, there's a lot of housing in the industrial, between Route 5 and Paul's Road as well.
Yeah.
But, actually, we put the green on the other side. I'm looking at,
Yeah.
no, I'm looking,
No,
no, this is Paul's Road.
right.
Right, this is.
That's
Road
Route
coming out
5.
here. Paul's Road coming up here.
I think-
Right.
Between Route 5 and
I think
Paul's Road.
you got a label saying land is too steep and currently for industrial and is currently residential, and it's probably apt.
Yeah, the label that we have, yes, actually, the label that we have, I was thinking it was the Dana Holby property, it's not.
No, it's not.
It's the Freeman property,
Right, it is
actually,
the Freeman
and it is
property.
too steep, and it's,
Yeah.
that's not gonna be anything but housing ever.
But I think that,
The Holby property could be industrial, that side on Paul's
On
Road.
that side of Paul's Road, we have put that in.
You have,
Oh.
okay,
Yeah.
that would make more sense, yeah,
but we also show
yeah.
That as well.
No,
Yeah,
it's-
and that picks up with the residential on the other side of Route 5, which
Right.
also makes sense. It's all residential now. Okay. Did we cover the map?
Yes,
Okay. How are we doing on time? I'm afraid we may have used our first hour just getting through
a map.
the map.
Can I
Well,
ask
we
you a question?
do have things on the agenda for the rest of the evening, so.
Sure, okay.
Can I ask one quick question before we move on? Mr. Miskovich mentioned early on the possible problems involved in creating newly non-conforming parcels. Do we have any tool to quantify that?
Not at the level of the parcel, but we do have a table that we presented to the select board at their last meeting, which showed in a tabular format the changes between the existing districts as they're defined and the existing
Do you have
permitted
your
and
maps?
conditional use tables that go with those.
Non-conforming maps?
Yes.
The proposed
Yeah, but it's just for
zoning districts
residential.
and their proposed
Maybe you wanna share
conditional and
It's
permitted
not
uses,
as much on
and it was
uses
a
as
comparison of the
dimensional.
two.
I think
And
they
then
can just sort
we
of
looked at
upset the you don't want this either.
the rationale behind those changes, district by district. It's not an exact apples to apples comparison because we eliminate several zoning districts and we create a small handful of new zoning districts. And so you can't translate directly from the existing ordinance to the proposed WI very easily without sort of going through some filtering. But we were able to have a meaningful discussion about what was in and what was out, district by district, and go back to basically what we did was go back to the principal statement, the description at the beginning of each zoning district, and clarify how we established a list of permitted and conditional uses on the basis of the description of the zoning district.
And those presentations that were made for the select board there, are they available on the website?
They're available from
Yeah,
BCTV
we
as
can put them up on our.
video, and we'll.
Of the select board
Yes, and
meeting?
we can make a link to those.
Yeah, because I think they'd be very helpful to,
There's a couple of things there's a number of things about nonconformity that I think we'd like to talk about. There's the nonconforming uses, there's nonconforming dimensional standards. It's always been an issue. I think if you were to look at any of our existing residential districts in the current zoning, you'll probably find more nonconformity than you will conformity. And we did take a look at some of the residential districts on the proposed zoning, and it's still, we can share that with you perhaps when we get to those sections. These are more dimensional requirements, but it's 80 to 90% of the existing homes are nonconforming in some form or another. I don't know whether you try to fix that. We have neighborhoods, historic neighborhoods where they're just really tight, they don't meet setback requirements. And so anyway, just something to be aware of, I think, and to see whether what you're proposing is how that fits. Should we take a look at the use chart? I think this might be fairly quick, and I'm the one talking to the guys. I'm just trying to recall why we all worked on this, and in summary, I think all we did was sort of add conditional uses. We understand, I think, the intent, the purposes of the zoning districts, why some things were permitted. Again, if you can deal with form, we really felt like a lot of these things would offer some flexibility to make them conditional uses, to not, we sort of have this discussion and say, well, why not? What's wrong with that? How would that be out of character with a neighborhood? So you can see in red where there's a lot of C's added. I think there's a couple of other things. There's a footnote on the version we had for the RN district around major corridors for zoning, which is currently residential office. And wanted to, that's a current zoning ordinance, which I think requires that 60% of the buildings stay residential. Those are corridors that have a lot of traffic. They're trending towards commercial uses, but that RO, we think, has been pretty effective at keeping the historic buildings intact. Because, for whatever reason, people can't tear them down and build something new.
And those are changes that you guys made at some of the previous
Oh.
meetings. So professional services has been added up to 2,000 square feet with a dwelling as a conditional use in a residential neighborhood. And then that size limitation doesn't apply if it's on Western Avenue east of I-91, where there's those larger structures. And then you also added the shop store piece to limit that to Western Ave, east of I-91 and South Main Street, and to our definition of neighborhood market. So basically the idea of trying to have the corner store accessible to neighborhood residents without opening up that district to too much retail traffic, which is what we heard from people who live there.
So, I don't know, I don't think we need to go through this line by line unless somebody else feels differently. So, just if you don't mind taking the time and think about those comments, maybe you've got a lot of them covered already, but.
Could I ask one specific
Sure.
question? I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, you can talk. Why did you change light industrial in the urban center from permitted to conditional?
UC, light industrial.
I'm assuming I'm interpreting this right.
Yeah, because light industrial could have nuisance characteristics that I think you'd want the ability to have greater control on. So, yeah. I mean, there has been light industrial downtown. It hasn't, there hasn't had noise or fumes or truck traffic that has been an issue, but certainly light industrial could. I mean, Bob Johnson's Delta Business Campus was in the Stone Church in downtown for years, and they operated. So I think it's a viable concept, but it just seemed like additional review is warranted. Looks like we did the same thing on miscellaneous manufacturing under UC.
So they're all conditional uses except I see one.
Do we have one permitted? I mean,
Okay.
which one was that? Oh, yeah.
Performance in the institutional use, performance theater.
Yeah. In the institution, we've got theaters potentially and certainly institutions now, and we think that there's probably the potential for some of that at Austin as well. And again, we were sort of looking at it, so I'm not sure it needs to be conditional. I mean, I don't know. Conditional is okay too.
Okay.
Because it just gives you the ability to look at it more intensely, but maybe we.
Well, so thank you. So you've introduced this chart and we're all going to look at all the
Right.
Cs.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, one more question. There was one comment asking whether a 25,000 should be a 2,500 in here.
Yes. That was
Right.
on the top of 2-9?
No, the answer is no.
Okay, so it is 25,000?
Yeah.
Okay.
What is
We,
that?
we changed the large-scale retail language in the current zoning, and so that provision
Dash
is
nine.
taking the place of the language that used to relate to.
Okay.
Oh, the large big box
Yeah.
language that was in there?
So
I
basically, it's
see.
over 25,000, and now it's conditional. And
And could we add those two other uses to industrial? The gym and the credit
All
union
right, we
slash
didn't get that
bank?
on here.
We'll consider,
You-
we'll consider all the comments.
Yeah.
Okay,
The,
so there's this memo that we received today, and then I don't know whether you also wanted to make some sort of general comments that's similar to what you said to the select board, so
well, we have.
those are your choices.
I think that, so if we're running out of time, I honestly would like to ask if maybe we could come back again. We have this memo, which we think needs some context, and maybe not an equal number of comments about the other two chapters, but close. And, happy to sort of read through that, or if you guys want to read through it, we can come back and answer questions you have. And then, yes, we do have some concern about the restrictions on the use changes under PUDs. We think that in particular that is an unnecessary, or I should say a restriction that could hurt the community going forward when something might occur that we haven't thought about. It's hard to know. It's hard to know what you might see happening at Austin, for instance, which is a campus that's going to get redeveloped, and it's 100,000 square feet. And if we pick something and it turns out that there's a use that is viable that could fit within the context of its location, we'd like to have the ability to bring that back through and talk about that use, even if it's not allowed currently in IT district, for instance. So again, I think that perhaps is a longer conversation than a couple of minutes, and chapter 3 and chapter 2. So I know you guys have a busy agenda. You've done a tremendous amount of work, and you're still trying to get this prepped because you got a timeline. But we would, I guess, love to have the opportunity to continue this conversation and drill a little deeper on these things.
So there'll be more on the vein of Mr. Whitaker's comments for other
That includes the
chapters?
first, I think, 4 chapters of Section 300, and 2 of the more problematic ones are not covered, and those were the subdivision regulations and plan unit developments. So, and that's not getting into Section 2. Sections 1, 4, and 5, the concerns are very few.
Yeah. And Section 3, a lot of these are, now we're starting to get into sort of technical stuff that, again, I think, Pete and I are engineers, and we were looking at the stormwater section, and we're not sure how that works. We don't know how to comply with that. And again, I think it came from another community. So somebody else has sort of looked at that, but it's not consistent with what we're using or what there's a whole bunch of standards for some of the things you've gotten here, industry standards that we're concerned. And I think you're trying to be comprehensive, and it's good. This needs to be rewritten. But we are also concerned that sometimes the details of this, it's important to sort of get as many of the details right as we can. We're not going to get them all right. We realize that. We just like to get, where we've gone through some of these things we've identified. We have some serious questions about, and some of them I think are perhaps more complicated than they need to be to accomplish some things. And there's some areas where we'd really like you to refer to another standard. I mean, you're trying to cover driveway standards or highway standards in a page, and I got a shelf this thick of resources for how to design those things. And sort of like, if something does not comply with that, what do I do? So I don't know. We're not going to solve that, but I think we'd love to. We've gone through. We've tried to, at least on this one, write it up. We'd like to get written comments for the rest of our comments as well, so you've got something easier to respond to. But I don't think we can just leave this for you and not explain it. It wouldn't be very useful.
Okay, nor is it something that we want to go over line by line.
Sure.
So we would appreciate having the rest of your comments as soon as possible, because we are wrapping up this process.
Yeah, we heard that. We're trying.
And then, other than the comments that you made about the PUD, is there something that you'd like to put in writing for the commissioners to consider?
Well, we'll put our comments in writing about the PUD, but I think we'd like to have a conversation about that as well. So maybe you can't tell us tonight whether we'll have the opportunity to come back before you close out this draft. Is that what you're telling us? That you've got some comments, you want our final comments now? Or are you going to consider?
We want your final comments shortly, because if you want us to consider them, we're wrapping up a draft that will go to public hearing and then give it to the select board.
So is there another meeting between now and you're wrapping up your draft where we might be able to get in and get
We
some
hadn't
rest?
planned, I think that if I'm reading this right from our last time, we had planned this meeting and then we planned the public hearing, which would be on July 29th,
But that
the first
changed.
one. It did?
That changed.
In the select board meeting? Okay.
Yeah. So do you want to speak to the schedule then, Sue?
Because it seems like how this plays out depends
Let
on,
me do that.
Yeah.
So what we expected was that you would be able to present documentation prior to tonight, speak to it tonight,
Yeah.
that the planning commission and staff would process it. The planning commission with staff support would review your comments, make what would be a series of potential technical changes with minor policy implications, but something that we could present and explain and the planning commissioners could approve as changes to the draft. And then a different category of questions or comments which would fall into policy decisions. And they would have time to contemplate those policy decisions and look at the implications of those. We assumed that we would have one subsequent meeting to do that prior to the first public hearing of the planning commission. Planning commission proposes 2 public hearings, and then a subsequent meeting to determine if that version of the draft is ready to move forward to the select board. And then the select board then has 2 public hearings, and we are aiming at a end of September deadline for approval of the land use regulations by the select board. They have a heavy agenda as well.
Is there a
So-
chance we could even get a copy of the proposed changes that we
Well-
didn't see, or?
Yeah, the other thing is, I don't know that, I mean, we would rather get our comments to you before the public, I
Yes.
really don't want to come to the public hearing and say,
Yeah.
gee, we think the lighting standard ought to get tweaked a little bit, you know?
The
So
more
there's-
information we can
design
get now, and
requirements.
the
Yeah.
more complete it is,
Right.
the more beneficial it is to the process.
Right.
So
But we are locked in to a timeline and a commitment that basically the land use regulations need to be considered and adopted and or amended by the select board before they turn their attention to the budget, which is typically the
So,
work of October.
so are you saying, so again, just to sum it all up, then there's not going to be, I mean, so, you know, it's just a lot of stuff to cover in an hour. I mean, I think we did pretty well on what we did cover. We were able to explain that, but we're sort of scratching the,
You've been looking at this since January?
yeah, I'm sure, and years before, no doubt.
I mean, it's 2 hours a week we've been spending for every week,
Well,
basically,
I-
going through this.
If I may say, I'm just hearing about this now, so
Yeah.
it's,
Well, and, you know, we appreciate that, and quite frankly, you know, it's, yep, it's, you know, we would have liked to have sort of gotten here faster and given you more information documented, but it's been a heavy lift for us to get this to, we're just trying to be constructive and, you know, and get information to you in the appropriate sort of time.
So if you
And
get
make it
us
better.
the remainder of your comments, it can be circulated to the commission prior to our next meeting.
So would we have the opportunity to speak at your next meeting, I guess is what I'm asking? Are you saying that that was a working meeting and you really didn't have the time?
Well, basically, you know, I think what you presented tonight was really very helpful. I think comments like this are very detailed. I think it's better that the commission digest it, the staff digest it, our consultant, and present it in a package as to how these comments relate to the deliberations that we made when we were making
Yeah.
them. So I think that's better done, frankly, without you.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we're going to do all our work at a public meeting. We're going to be at the next meeting, but it's better to have your work first so that
Sure.
it can be worked into our program.
Yeah.
I agree.
So you, and nobody in here knows how to do stormwater design, or nobody in here knows how to do roadway design. So all I'm saying is that,
We're planners, not engineers.
fair enough. So we've got some additional resource for you that we'd like to offer before this gets finalized. So some of those comments are in here, so when you look through it, I guess, then, you know, decide whether it makes sense to have us come back, because we're happy to do that. We'll work to our best ability to get you more written comments. If this is our last opportunity to give you comments from a policy standpoint, I do want to come back to the PUD. I know that we've got a new PUD zone, I haven't seen it yet, that's agricultural related. I'll pass on the comments that we made at the select board meeting because we knew it was sort of policy level. Didn't really want to have those comments there, quite frankly, before coming here, to be honest with you. We were asked to come. But the current zoning, the enabling legislature allows the town to allow a PUD to look at uses to change a use within a zoning district. That is something that has proved to be very important for this town in the past. And it's been an arduous, long process. It's a zoning amendment, essentially. And we've always complained about how long it is. Personally, I would rather we keep the ability to have that flexibility in the ordinance, even if it is a long, arduous process. Maybe it should be a long, arduous process to make that zoning change. But there are times where something comes up where you hadn't thought of it ahead of time. And you guys are operating, the map, the zoning districts, you're operating appropriately at a very large regional scale. That's the appropriate way to look at this. When you start looking at something on a smaller scale, there are parcels. The retreat farm was one where the zoning would not have allowed the Grafton Village cheese to happen, would not allow what's currently being worked on there, which is a redevelopment of 50,000 square feet into a combination of a whole mix of uses. Now, we happen to have a PUD that's already approved and that it's grandfathered, and I'm not sure what was wrong with allowing us to do that. It was a long public process to change that zoning to put that in place. Delta Business Campus is another example. That was rural residential. It's a self-isolated valley. It was a large parcel, went through long, arduous process. It has industrial uses. It actually has residential uses. You change it to industrial, you say we're all covered. Well, I don't know that there's anything wrong with having mix of uses, because the top part of that parcel is really not appropriate for industrial, and it had at that point infrastructure for housing. So, and the developer wanted to have housing, workforce housing close by. That was a community decision that approved that. Your ordinance as proposed would not allow us to have that consideration short of a zoning amendment. And as Rod's pointed out, those are two examples where they're somewhat self-isolated, and maybe you could have taken what was industrial at exit 3 and come in for a zoning amendment and change the zoning. And what I'd like you guys to, so we think that there's some challenges with that, and so let me explain that. Where we've seen this in other towns, if I go to the Planning Commission and say, gee, we think there's a great opportunity for the town, we'd like to change the zoning. The first thing the Planning Commission says, yeah, right, that's not on our work plan. We've got all this stuff we have to do, and we were in the process of doing that. Now, I don't have an applicant by right to ask you to consider that as a Planning Commission. And often the answer is, yeah, maybe we'll get to it in the next zoning rewrite. But for the meantime, that opportunity is gone. The developer, the entity, they're sort of leaving. And it's a much harder process to go through, to say to a community and neighbors why we should just do a whole zoning amendment. It's just now people are saying, well, if that ability to change the zoning was something that you had by right, it would be in the zoning ordinance. We have the ability to have it. It's always been in this town. The enabling legislature allows you to do that. You guys are removing that now. So you've raised the burden for allowing that to happen. You've certainly not enabled an applicant the ability to sort of ask the question and get a response, because you have no obligation to even take it up. And then the final thing is that it's often the case where you don't want to adopt a zone whole cloth. Maybe just an element or a use or something else that flexibility has happened. Most of our campuses are out in the middle of rural residential areas, have developed Prop World Learnings out there. I brought up Center for Living Democracy the other night that's a defunct kind of little retreat that was developed off Fox Run Road out in an RR district. But it was isolated. It was really low impact, and it was passed as a PUD. And I look at that and I'm not sure why that's bad. Now maybe there's examples of places where this has been abused. I think there was a PUD on Putney Road that was abused. It was like a small lot, and somebody didn't want to conform with dimensional standards, and they got a PUD approved for the true value or something. It's the only one I can think of. In general, it's been used pretty judiciously, and it has been a benefit to the community to have that. So again, I would ask you to think hard, or at least reconsider whether that's something that you want to leave the capacity. And again, if you want to make that a higher standard, raise the bar, say that there's something beyond the DRB to get that particular change in use. I know that that's cumbersome. You're trying to avoid that, but that would be preferable to us than just seeing it eliminated entirely, which is what's in there.
I was a member of the planning board when we wrote the last zoning ordinance, and I can tell you there's no way in heck we ever envisioned VBEC or Delta Business Campus or Grafton Cheese or any of those type of things. There's just no way that we know. I mean, we were still thinking Maxwell Smart had a pretty good phone in those days, really. And this is how long this ordinance is going to last, And there's no way any of us can envision what's ahead. And that's the reason to do exactly what Bob is talking about, is to make it some flexibility so that we can do things that are really beneficial to the town.
Well, we'll take all your comments,
Thanks for
and we
giving us the
appreciate
time.
the time you took to formulate them and to present them. Thank you.
Is it helpful for you to have a deadline for the rest of the written?
Yes, actually.
Yeah. And, can we propose something?
When's your next meeting? Your next meeting is in 2 weeks, or?
Our next meeting is August 3rd.
August 3rd.
Okay.
So to be able to be distributed and then commented on by staff, and us also to have the time to work through what's been provided today.
Probably more like 2 weeks.
I think you got a
The
maximum of
20th.
2 weeks, and I prefer 10 days.
Okay.
Well, we'll do our best.
Great.
We're all sort of, as you guys are as well, sort of operating at capacity, so.
It doesn't have to be one hit. Maybe you want to spend a little bit of time and allocate who's going to be on first. And then some kind of letter or covering memo that, at least explains the pieces.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we'll
And
do.
today's,
do our
particularly
best.
the discussions on that was beneficial, and I think that between our minor changes and some of your suggestions, there's plenty of room for us to conflict.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
but it's important for us to actually see some kind of written comments that we can respond to and share with the planning commission to deliberate on with regard to the bigger policy questions that you raised tonight.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll try to get you some more information in 2 weeks, and then our offer stands. If you get through these comments, something doesn't make sense. And a lot of times, again, we read it, we're learning as well from what you guys have already contemplated and thought through. So there may be some more feedback that would be helpful. for both
And I
sides.
think we found at the select board meeting that there were some comments that you had that we had already made the same
Yeah.
changes, so
Yeah,
it's
Well,
not
and
as...
that, so that's my other question, actually, is should they get a new draft so they're not working on, like, reiterating things we've already been over?
Well, that might add another layer.
Yeah, that's
right.
that-
I think we've
more
already.
complex
we've edited
than
the
not,
old one.
yeah.
We thought about that.
Okay,
At this point,
Good
it might
question.
be-
We can.
Might be better than to be locked into the version that they've got.
okay.
Right.
Thanks.
Is it possible, though, to get just a copy of the new proposed zoning map changes that you guys have made? That would be helpful.
The zoning map is on.
It's already on?
Yeah, so the updated map is
Okay,
online.
I wasn't sure because I didn't have my reference when I looked at it.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Brandy.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks for giving us the time.
Thank you.
Do you need help? We got a lot of
Okay.
stuff. All right.
So we have a number of... my agenda went. Here we go. Section 248, 45-day notice. A group called Pristine Sun.
Hey, Liz, can we just have a,
Do you need a break?
Second, and we'll get right
Sure.
back. Yeah, a break would be good.
All right, we'll take it. We'll break. It's still Monday, July 6th.
Really nice.
So let's turn this meeting over to staff and consultants.
Okay, so maybe what we should do is run a similar approach to the map, starting on your left, which is also the west, and then moving to the east, kind of as if you're passing over the map, right?
Okay.
So the first thing that comes up is the designation of a neighborhood center area that's pretty large on the on Route 9, sandwiched between two sections of rural residential, basically. So corresponding with the Chelsea Royal on the northern side of Route 9 and West View Apartments, I believe it's called, to the south. Taking
What does the neighborhood center get us that the rural business doesn't?
It's higher density residentially. It's a real difference in form of to me, I don't think the uses are, the non-residential uses are, is significantly different, but it would really be a change in the form of development, pulling the buildings to the road. I mean, that neighborhood center is sort of a walkable urban center concept at a somewhat smaller scale than downtown. So I see that as the question before you. I don't think it's so much a question of the use as it is of the form and density.
You think it's more of an intensity issue?
Yeah, and physical physical form.
With buildings.
I mean, this rural business sets the buildings back with like a 20-foot landscape
Yes.
thing, and the neighborhood center may require the buildings to be not more than 20 feet back, if I'm
Right.
remembering correctly.
Yeah.
So it's quite a different approach.
Yeah, so I don't like the idea of setting up like rival urban centers. And if it were more intense, I think I would tend to do that.
I think it's interesting. I mean, I understand the pedestrian shed and the built form, but then again, I feel like we spent a lot of time on the rural commercial back in 2011, and given some of what they saw as the assets, which were kind of the distant views. I wonder if pulling the buildings too close is going to kind of. At the same time, we've tweaked and allowed a lot more uses in than what the rural commercial has now, but I'm a little.
Yeah, because there's
Could go either
already
way.
like the Village Green.
I think I have a deeper felt concern that was expressed through the development of the so-called rural commercial, which we're now going to call rural business for those of you who are new. I just want to make it really clear that that's what we're talking about. And so the basis for the rural business was to preserve the view shed and to actually also maintain rural Vermont vernacular architecture. And I would actually want to ask whether something that has more of a village feel, which I think Neighborhood Center is attempting to achieve in terms of density and form, is compatible with that rural aesthetic that the rural business area is intended to preserve. And it's a relatively unusual, it's a distinctively Vermont aesthetic that the community seeks to preserve the rural business and match contemporary uses with a traditional village edge appearance.
I think we also talked a lot about having this be a gateway.
Yes, and so I think it's a conflict in terms of transects as well. So to use the terminology and the concepts that that have been proffered in other parts of the discussion tonight and will underpin our work in other places, you would come down. So if you were heading east from Marlborough and you're coming into town, and this is your initial experience of Brattleboro, assuming that their proposed neighborhood center was built out, you would go from steep, green, hilly, rural Vermont, and then you drop into the equivalent of the bottom end of Canal Street, or a fairly dense village form, fairly abruptly. There wouldn't be any transition from a slight increase in the number of houses that you can see or anything else. And so this is actually meant to be something of a transition for the traveler on the western periphery of the settled area of town. Acknowledging, you can see from the map that you've been traveling through Brattleboro at this point for 10 or 15 minutes, probably in a car, right? Probably behind a truck.
There's adequate services for pedestrians in the rural business as contemplated.
Yes,
I believe that pedestrian amenity has been addressed in rural business.
It has.
And that what we've also observed is very limited redevelopment in the rural business district, but that as things turned over and changed, you would see better adherence to those standards.
And then there's adequate services for the bread, eggs, slushy crowd.
Yes, I believe Cumberland Farms provides all those things.
That'd be great.
And
Along with-
maybe
What's that?
and maybe a new one, so.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if I may comment, I suspect, as I'm thinking about this, that they probably are looking at these changes in this area pretty much in conjunction where they would like to see more urban development in that area, and in addition to that, a separate
Yes.
walkable area
Yes.
to go along with that. It's certainly, I don't think it's like,
It's not in a vacuum.
it's yes. So, and I think we said this at the beginning, I can't remember which of you said this, that we've already got one urban center and one village center. And I think I'm seeing the concern here where if you had a separate one just a little bit to the west, it's creating maybe a competition between those. And I know that there are right now places that haven't turned over in the existing village center in West Brattleboro. So I don't see
Right.
the need for that.
Yeah, I
And I
think
don't
it's
see it in the
counterproductive.
foreseeable future. I mean, he talked about well out, I don't see it in quite a ways out as being a
Right.
need there.
We've had that discussion with some members of this organization, of this Lewis group previously, in relation to intensifying commercial use further east on Route 9. And it's an important question to ask, so I'm glad that you've asked it. And that is, literally, how much retail space can the town sustain?
Yep.
And at what point does the provision of more retail, what is the term I'm looking for? Zoning districts that provide for or allow more of a particular kind of retail space. And it should be remembered that rural business, it's not retail, it is obviously retail, but it's of a form and a kind that I think would still satisfy this residential neighborhood. And I don't believe the actual residential population here is going to grow dramatically such that there wouldn't be adequate services for them in
And another
rural
way of
businesses.
flipping it is things that would be satisfied by a rural business district would not want to be and would not fit any village center. So that would be a place for those opportunities.
Right, and the kinds of things I think that the community envisioned were things like agricultural implement dealers and repair
Yeah, I thought about
places.
John Deere.
Yes, something very rural like that, exactly, like a John Deere, but only old John Deere, not new John Deere. So something akin to that. And even if you to take, so maybe, so can I just get your, James, did you have a reaction to it?
I think the traffic goes too fast.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's currently posted at 40 and it's widely ignored, I would say, until you're well into the middle of rural business.
Doesn't seem like a great place to be.
So am I
walking around.
hearing, I haven't heard from Kathy, but is there some sort of consensus will be that it's rural business?
Yeah, I agree. I think that this sort of transition from like out to in is important, and I feel like it would be setting up some kind of weird competition with the village center. And if you're thinking about, pedestrian access, I would say that it should be focused on the village center and try to like create more retail opportunities in that area. Where you can actually walk.
I did like the idea of including, maybe getting ahead of us, I did like the idea of extending the neighborhood center south to the off-ramp on Canal Street.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, okay.
Okay, what's next?
Let's
Okay.
do the residential neighborhood.
So yeah, there's a couple of little boxes. This is sort of this lime green color.
Let's call it chartreuse.
Chartreuse, which just sounds really chartreusey. So there's a big rectangular parcel that that has a text box called with these two properties as the first three words, and then there's a smaller, and the red line just touches another chartreuse parcel that's a blobby shape tucked in against Route 9 and just under what I believe is rural residential.
It is conserved
It is
by the
conserved.
World Land Trust.
And
Which
it's
is the
considered-
reason we
Right.
initially had that in the rural residential and
Yeah.
then put it into the rural because it is conserved.
Right.
Yeah.
So we were so even during the discussion, we were able to eliminate the discussion of that smaller blobby shape because it's conserved. It's always going to be rural. And so that's how it's met in our proposed.
A smaller watershed, you mean on the east, on the furthest west, the next
Yes.
east.
Okay. This is not gonna help,
So
this is not
that's
gonna help
okay,
anybody.
that's on the table.
I got it.
This one here, okay,
Yeah.
good. Now, the more rectilinear one, I don't have any sense, and I should say, and Kate, you raised the question as to who owned those parcels.
Yeah.
That can be an important question, sort of, when you're really diving. I think I would prefer us to stay at a more conceptual level and so therefore not contemplate the likelihood of the current owners to want to see it be transformed or whatever, changed in some way. I think that you could make an argument that that could become residential.
And I asked that only about this particular one because
Right.
it said designs for
Right.
blah, 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 et cetera.
And I feel it's conceivable. I don't know what the yield is likely to be in terms of the number of parcels or whatever. It's hard to calculate from here, but I don't know. Anyway, I'm interested to hear people's reactions.
Right now, this rectilinear portion is proposed to be zoned what?
Rural.
Rural.
It's rural.
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 I don't know this parcel very well, but.
I guess, I mean, the question I would have is the feasibility of bringing water and sewer to it. If it conceivably could be easily served with water and sewer, then I think, you know, if you want to include from a policy perspective, undeveloped, suitable land in the residential neighborhood, then that would make sense. If it's a little more challenged, either from a resource point of view or from a connection to the water and sewer point of view, then you could consider making it rural
What
residential.
is the cul-de-sac directly to the west of it that's in residential neighborhood and they are proposing changing?
That was a PUD, that's the,
That's Westgate, not Westgate. West, what?
Oh, wait, is
Woodbury.
it Westbrook?
No.
No.
I always get mixed up.
it's what Barbara.
Yeah, no, doesn't help.
I know.
You mean the Mather, Brookside, and others?
No, you see a cul-de-sac with RN written in the middle of it?
I think it
Yes.
is Westgate.
No,
No.
it's above Westgate.
It's above Westgate.
It's the residential, single-family residences. You drive through Westgate to get there, not Stockwell.
I think they're talking about this with RN and what?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's surrounded by suggested changes.
Yeah.
Well, that's not suggesting that it change. right?
No, but I was curious. what-
I mean,
what
it is
was
smack
that,
dab
what the
between two
infrastructure
cul-de-sac
issue
developments.
was.
Or,
Yeah, I'm not opposed to that at all. I feel like it seems like there's municipal water and sewer to that sort of area. And, you know, I think connecting the other residential neighborhood areas behind the rural business would make sense. You know, it's kind of like built, I'm not opposed to that.
I think-
I'd rather there be dense development there
Yeah.
than, you know,
Yeah.
somewhere else.
Yeah, it seems a reasonable extension of residential areas, and that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, my only question, I guess, is whether that should be residential neighborhood or rural residential, because it's, you know, you're sort of jumping in two steps instead of jumping in one.
Right. It's Sherwood Circle,
Exactly.
the name of the cul-de-sac.
Okay, so maybe, so what's next? This
Okay,
map?
so we're okay with the rectilinear piece?
Yeah.
Okay.
Another Brookside, another Bridgewater.
But I would suggest that there be, at our next meeting, that there be like kind of a summary, like what do we think of this, what do we think of that, so that we can all
Yeah,
vote
and
on it.
I'd like to look a little bit more out there. I haven't.
You were also missing a couple of members that could reasonably have questions, and I think, so if you wouldn't mind directing us to also inquire as to the feasibility of servicing it, that might determine whether we in the end recommend that it become residential or rural residential.
Yes, I think all these discussions are subject to your expert follow-through.
Okay, thank you.
And I should note that they proposed a fairly big change here, but we didn't talk about it, of adding this gigantic rural residential swath.
Yeah,
Yes.
he mentioned it briefly
Is that
as kind of
gonna
like
change?
a transition area.
Oh, he did?
What is,
My concern is its location adjacent.
yeah, what
Water.
was?
So the surrounding, okay, so so we didn't discuss, James is right. This area here,
Tricked by colors.
oh, you're tricked by,
Yeah.
so this is currently on the district, on the draft zoning map that we've provided you, that's rural.
And it's pretty much all rural today and adopted zoning as well.
And it's currently is rural. And I think that the issue, my immediate reaction to this is to be alarmed about the proximity of this to the water reservoir, which is the drinking supply.
Right.
And I think also that this is regarded fondly, I don't think that would necessarily be a popular move at the neighborhood level. So although it shows, you know, an expansion of the developable area, you know, an increase in the intensity of development as suggested by the group that presented tonight, feel it's like somewhat at odds with the character. It's a dramatic shift in the character of that neighborhood.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'm happy to hear your reactions.
I think also that, I'm just looking at their note, I think also that wasn't in a vacuum because they're also noting that's a transition from their suggested pedestrian shed, so.
Yes.
And I think we're also, they don't have the arrow going here, but I think that also includes the southern parcel.
Right. Yes, I agree. Immediately under the,
It seems like they're
The rectangle.
creating the pedestrian shed, they said they already have.
right.
Well, there is a pedestrian shed there, but.
There's an existing pedestrian shed which is not likely to increase in size dramatically.
Are there trails through there?
There are,
No, there is on the
There's some here.
WR land.
Right.
By the reservoir.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
and I wanted just to go back quite a long way to the beginning of our discussions, more when
You
we were,
mean January?
even before.
Earlier this evening?
No, no,
Start
even,
this before January.
even before January.
After January.
I was,
Even, yeah, so that's why I'm taking it. So right back when we were actually contemplating the subdivision regulations intensely, more than the zoning part, if you like, we gave serious thought to implementing policies and goals from the town plan, which identify east of 91 being and along the Route 9 corridor as being the two areas where we want to intensify residential development and development in general. And we wanted to preserve, through a series of approaches, the rural lands beyond the immediate Route 9 corridor and west of I-91. And so if you were to pursue what they're suggesting here, it's not necessarily a huge increase in the density of use, but it is a significant increase in density of use.
It's a philosophical change.
So yes, it's very much a policy change, and it's at odds, I think, with the goals and policies that are identified in the town plan and that you see embodied in the subdivision regulations, particularly with regard to the preference in those zoning districts, rural and rural residential, to use conservation subdivision as the major approach, right? So in other words, the proposed land use regulations that we've worked on so far don't discourage residential use in the rural or rural residential districts, but they do lay down a particular process, which is not as strongly applied in straight residential. And so it is, at this cut, it's very much a policy question because it would go to weaken the commitment to focusing development on the,
And all that discussion about the class of roads
Right.
and the
Yes.
impact it has on
On-
municipal services and all
Yes.
of that.
And we've had that discussion at length, and so,
And I don't really want to have it again.
yeah, well, it's not to say that we can't, that you as a body can't step away from it, but I just wanted you to be very clear that these two all these suggested changes in this far west Brattleboro section are really at odds with the policy and goal commitments that were made both in the town plan and the subdivision regulations.
Great. What's next?
Okay.
East.
So go
East.
Three residential suggestions.
Right, so the chartreuse, all to two to the south of Route 9, one, the tail hanging off there, so just a change here. Then down here, which is the Brookside area, which is immediately west and upslope from, immediately west of Memorial Park, and then over the road from that, basically. And so, again, these could be encountered in the same way as the comments that the comments that I just made are relevant for these three sections as well, I would say, to some extent. I think that the property.
So these are currently rural residential, and the
Yeah,
topic on the table is to change it to residential neighborhood.
right.
And perhaps you'd like to look into the infrastructure suitability for these areas.
I'm not familiar with the Mather property in any great detail. It is on the edge of the water and sewer network, and I believe topographically it's not too challenged. So
That's the furthest west.
that's the furthest west
I
one.
think we talked about that.
It's kind of an
when
L
we-
shape.
I feel like we talked about that. Not the Mather property, the one, sorry.
I think,
This one.
Well, I was just gonna say, maybe we want to table this until you guys look into it some more.
which one did you want?
This one I thought we had considered writing the town plan, or we looked at it. The one that's in between the village center and the water and recreation. I feel like we had considered that at some point, and,
The
you
Brookside?
know, when we were doing the.
Brookside?
Is that Brookside?
Yeah, I think that's Brookside, next to the
Brookside.
park.
Yeah,
That's the one that made the most sense to me when they were talking about it.
right.
I don't know if you guys disagree.
Maybe we should put a skate park there.
No, we got the skate permit approved. From
Big
BT.
controversial people.
The one that I'm least familiar with, but possibly has the most, is the jagged one on the northern side of Route 9. This one here, I actually don't know very much about. My understanding of Brookside,
Street.
yeah, off of Orchard Street. The Brookside, I think in the end, even though we're talking about it being quite close to water and sewer services, it's topographically pretty challenging. There's a plateau and it's quite steep. And so the complexity of the road link and the cost of the road link was pretty high. And so for me, it's a question of market demand more than anything else right now, which it doesn't rule it out. I think it's worth
Isn't it also in the flood zone?
the
very bottom.
The very bottom of it
Goes
is.
up quickly.
But that's already, the very bottom's already in the rural,
Right.
residential.
Residential.
Okay.
So I think,
There are some plateaus up
yes,
there.
right. But the question was accessing them with a road and then delivering services
Right,
there. So even though we're not talking very long distances,
right.
there were just those costs were prohibitive in terms of making the development viable. Now that could change over time. And so it may prove viable to zone it as residential over rural residential. But do you want us to look at those?
Sure.
Yeah.
A study in chartreuse.
I
Should
think,
keep with the same
Brandon's got the
color
right shirt
scheme.
on for that.
And look at this next one where it says municipal sewer and small lots already exist here.
Technically, if we run west to east, it would be the new water and recreational up in the north though.
Oh, right. I'm not,
My only
Can we
thought
stick
on
with
that,
one color?
oh, do you want to stick with all, okay, do you want to stick with all chartreuse?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's easier,
okay.
sorry.
So, sorry, James. So let's
Talk about
get,
the other name, Red Center.
let's, yeah, that's okay.
Wow.
Oh, he's quick though. That was quick. All right, so we're running out of time here. So that one down the bottom on Guilford Street. I don't have a strong, if people feel it can be residential because of the size of the lots and the delivery of services, then I don't know. I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other.
I mean, I
And
think
is that, I just want to make sure I'm in the right place in my mind. So this is like where the Montessori school is
You've gone
up,
past that.
and then,
Yeah.
right, and that big winding road is the road that had potential development with the great views, right?
Yeah.
Is that to the west of
High
that?
Point, it's High Point West.
Yeah, okay,
Yes.
okay, I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
want to make sure I
Yeah,
know
and so
where we're at.
you don't take the turn to the Montessori school.
Right, it's just that.
You keep on driving to Guildford.
And before you
Yeah, I
get
don't
to
have any
Guilford,
issue with that. If there, I mean, to me, it makes sense. It's a question of whether the municipal services run out there or not at this point. I would say if they do, then perfectly fine. If they stop before what they're suggesting, then why increase the density if the infrastructure isn't there?
my other thought on looking at that is one of the density and intensity. And while those are small lots, they're not as small as what's possible in the residential neighborhood.
Right.
And the density could be significantly increased through multifamily. So, I mean, that might be something, I don't know, if that fits in sort of with the vision of the people who live there, what they think of their neighborhood.
Yeah, I think we really need to look at all these because there's a lot going on. I mean, first of all, there's all of these mechanisms that we've built into the ordinance to have cottages and
Mhm.
other density bonuses so that it might be,
Moot in a way.
The cottage one does work in the rural residential, we did allow for that.
Oh, well then,
so.
Yeah.
I didn't like this one. I think that that's like a clear border where that High Point Road is, where it becomes sort of country.
Yeah.
I don't
That's pretty
understand
good.
why we want to increase density
Yeah.
in the pretty country. I understand why they want to increase it in the town.
Right.
And
But
again,
I-
that's-
just because there's sewer up there isn't a good enough.
What
reason
James
to
is
do it.
saying echoes what you were saying about the town plan.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think.
But this will give us time to kind of,
Okay.
we all want to take a look and,
The other thing I'd say about that, which is sort of interesting, is that it's one of those definite roads that goes somewhere. Like it's a secondary link from the western part of town to Guildford. And it's a through road. It's sort of, I wouldn't grade it as arterial per se, but it actually receives quite a bit of traffic from people going in and out of Guildford on a daily basis, and who don't have cause or don't want to get caught up in the downtown traffic. So say you've got reason to go to and from West Brattleboro, this is your way of doing it.
is that a reason to develop it more intensely or not develop it more intensely?
Well, the argument I'm trying to make is somewhat similar to that stretch of Route 30. I would describe it as old style, one parcel deep, intense development along a main road. And that it doesn't have any kind of neighborhood form, like there's no side streets or anything. And there's not much ability topographically, I believe, or for the development of a neighborhood per se, right? With a grid pattern or anything like that. So the reality is it's got that funny 60s, 70s feel of,
Rural sprawl.
right. And so I caution you about wanting to encourage the intensification of that.
I think maybe just look at some of the northernmost parcels. It may be that we bring it a parcel or two further down the residential neighborhood, but not perhaps
All the
all the
way.
way. So it might be,
Right.
to provide a little bit of room for expansion outward, but
Okay. That's a nice compromise.
Well, this is
Very
all,
helpful, I think.
this is all pointing to the fact that your analysis and
Mhm.
digesting of all this will be very helpful.
look at that in a little greater detail,
Yeah.
that northern end.
So do we want to let James speak to Neighborhood Center or move on from this and change the meeting?
We've got
date?
two more chartreuse things to do. You could knock off chartreuse altogether. Not to say anything violent is going to happen to chartreuse, just we would finish that color. And then,
It's like a Disney movie, something's gonna happen to chartreuse.
all right, so
And then
we
we
go to
got-
Chartreuse, North Chartreuse, that's up against the water
Eaton
recreation.
Avenue.
yeah,
I don't have a problem putting it in residential.
We
districts.
swapped it once already. It was residential neighborhood in one of the earlier drafts, we switched it over with the idea that we were going to try to put more of the waterfront properties into the water.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is a residential neighborhood. They all do sit up high. I
And
think
part
we
of
should just-
the waterfront is preserved, right?
Yeah, it's
Yes,
a sanctuary.
And honestly, if one of the uses that are non-residential were allowed into that neighborhood,
They'd be unhappy about
it
it.
wouldn't be good. It wouldn't be good. It's very tight and.
Okay, that leaves one last chartreuse.
Okay. And this one's to the south.
One that he said he wasn't really big on.
This is a little, I was having a hard time following this.
I thought he said, as he was talking about it, that
Kind of backed out of it.
I actually crossed it off on my map
Yeah.
because I interpreted his explanation as
What does he,
Not
what
necessarily
is
one
it
thing.
being proposed to be zoned for?
It's rural residential now. so
That
they're
whole
proposing
triangular shape,
residential
essentially,
neighborhood.
right?
I think it's what, yes, and I think to that extent, it's a question of attempting to more carefully preserve the gateway function. So remember, you're sweeping into Brattleboro from the south at this point. It's one of your opening shots of developed Brattleboro, right? You're descending into town. Right now, when you look across it, see the edge of what's a state park, Fort Dunn State Park, which is the backdrop to this, and some, again, 60s, 70s style houses strung out along the road, and then a big open field and the old Familari property, the big open field sloping down to the northeast, and which is where Varbeck, the Vermont rural, whatever it's called, agricultural business park, whatever it's called, is.
Well,
And so
I don't think
that's
we
IT.
spend any more time on a plan that the proponents didn't really.
Didn't.
Well, what he
care
said
about.
is there's a lot of resource constraints, and then what I would also note about and there is, and also the municipal water and sewer doesn't serve all the parcels, and it's challenging to extend.
Right.
There has been some multifamily development done there, and it's not prohibited with the neighbors.
Yeah. So I would say,
Alright.
all the reasons that he
Did
enumerated.
say on the,
I bet you James wants to talk about the name.
I ain't gonna try.
I don't have those strongest feelings about this. I just noted your inconsistency. The reason I brought it up is because I didn't like the other neighborhood center because I feel like the traffic either is speeding up or slowing down from high speed there. But here, even though it's a gateway, I think it's kind of a nice idea because that area is anchored by the factory store there, and I don't know if that's going to be there forever.
And what were you proposing in that area? I can't.
So, yeah, right now that little section is split, so part of it's service center and part of it's neighborhood center.
Uh-huh.
It's such a small area.
It is.
I mean, I think I
And
prefer
the
the
difference
neighborhood
between
center.
So do I,
service
actually.
center and neighborhood center is what, gas stations?
I
No
think-
further stuff, I mean, the neighborhood center, more mixed use, more pedestrian scaled, buildings closer.
Right.
I think when we were making
Earlier.
this, we didn't have gas stations
Yes.
in there as a conditional use. And I
Right.
think that was one of the driving factors in the
Yes.
choice of leaving it service center, because I think we actually did discuss in variations of this map.
It's a vestige of an earlier version of neighborhood center that precluded gas stations.
So it's a potential question that
Yep.
will await your
Yeah.
study.
But at the same time, I really do feel that the immediate off-ramp area is very clearly service center oriented, and it's very abrupt, the shift. And I'm sure that Price Chopper and Brugger's and other stores that are in that plaza benefit to some extent from the passing traffic. But the reality is that they form far more of a neighborhood center function than they do passing traffic function. And so while it's kind of a really odd circumstance where literally block by block you get a very dramatic change, I think once you head north of Burger King on the eastern side of Route 5, You're done with service center stuff, and it really does change. And everything beyond that is neighborhood center. So if we're going to enforce a tight set of permitted and conditional uses for neighborhood center and service center, then there might be, I just think we should check that carefully. That's all.
Okay.
It doesn't offend me that it's a tiny service center area. If it means that what we're attempting to implement is a set of standards that are going to likely mean that the neighborhood center does flourish and turn into a real neighborhood center rather than a kind of a extended blobby service center.
Yeah.
You see what I'm trying to get at? It might be more about a,
Randy and I.
We don't have it, but
We can talk
we'll
about
talk about that later.
okay then, let's talk about
I
it.
think the service center actually.
Now, all these little tiny
What's
maize
that?
I think
colored
the service center.
items on Canal Street.
spent a lot of time.
I think it crosses it.
Yeah, we looked at every
Yeah.
picture of
Yeah.
every house, and
Yeah.
I really,
We're moving north.
yeah.
Oh, are we
Okay.
gonna?
We're going to switch gears here and
Yeah, I just want to say, while you guys are listening, that
We're having a planner's dispute.
we discussed all these little districts
The mixed use
on
is opposed to.
Canal Street
intensively.
intensively.
This is an older map that they were using.
Yeah.
And we've
so-
done some of the things that they're asking and not others, and you guys did spend a long time sort of carefully carving that map out.
And I don't want to do that again.
I agree, totally. Oh yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we really
And
did.
I mean, it is, the point that they're making about the industrial nonconformities, I think is just something that we need to present with the rationale.
Yeah,
For
but we
us, that was
did
a policy
discuss that.
kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
They
we, there
don't
was a
have
lot
good
of discussion
access,
of
they
that.
don't have,
Yeah.
they have nuisances that impact the quality of life in the neighborhood.
Right.
Okay.
So I think we'll look forward to your contributions next.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I,
Yes.
I struggle with those sort of basic ideas of zoning, which in my mind is that you're attempting to make, kind of like a comprehensive planning for the future based on like things that you've learned that have changed over the course of like 2 decades or something.
Exactly.
So the fact that, that one little brown section, that we had water, but is kind of like light industrial, I'm struggling with an argument that because light industrial is there, that it should be light industrial. And given what it is and its relationship to the river, I would really like to see that retained in the water and recreation areas so that the conception of that going forward is kind of inherent, that we're not giving up our waterways to potential industrial.
And
Yeah.
we had talked about it earlier meetings, what the best use of something is.
Right.
And since you brought that one up, I think the best use is to take advantage of the waterfront. And the waterfront, which we're calling it, because I think it's a lot clearer, which was brought up by people. The waterfront district does have built into its allowed uses, commercial uses,
Right.
which were those properties to turn over and at some point change their use. They could still be used in a commercial way, but that takes advantage of their location,
Yes,
proximity to the water.
I think in the intervening months, we've really done a good job of fleshing out what the waterfront zone is. And it's only, a good thing that takes advantage of its location and that can have some real benefits to the real estate holders as well as the policy issues. Okay?
Would you like to move on now?
I would indeed like to move
Oh,
on.
actually, I have one more, since we did discuss that part of the waterfront, I did have one comment on the other portion of it, the further extension of the waterfront on the other side of the river. The question on that is if that would be splitting off a certain amount of those parcels, and we sort of tried to move away from splitting up parcels. Well, I guess I agree that, yes, the path is there and that,
But the path already exists, so there's no point in zoning for it if it's going to be an easement, right?
Well, I don't think it's as permanent as a straight easement, because it's not.
But that's
gonna happen independently of the zoning board.
I think that the argument, the bigger argument, bigger policy argument is, do we split parcels or do we not? And I think that my preference and Brandy's will be no.
We've really minimized it, there's very few that are split at this point, so if you do want to do that and make a decision on that, I would say that it does undermine the change that we made where we brought the rural and rural residential to the road change, because that was a couple hundred feet off the road type of zoning before, and that would be the exact same thing you'd be doing here. So, and that was the rationale for getting rid of it over there. So just raise that. Did you think about when you think about those?
I'm correct that that trail does not have an easement all the way through, right?
I think it's disputed as to the status of the.
Yeah, I don't think the status, I think the legal standing of the easement is questioned by some. I think the matter of the trail is it's used regularly by people who know of it, and it's respected and accepted as an accepted path. But the legal status of the land underneath and around the trail is still the cause of some controversy. So,
But how we zone it is not gonna have an effect on
the
it.
zoning question, I don't believe is going to actually shed light or resolve that question one way or the other.
I don't mean to suggest that, but the reason I brought it up was that if a landowner defeated any claim that the trail had and developed that as rural residential, well, I guess if they defeat the claim on the trail, it doesn't matter.
I mean, the other thing that I would say there is,
There's riparian boundaries, aren't there?
yeah, and which within, the trails within the riparian boundary, number one. And number two, the distinction between rural residential and waterfront is so muted with this use.
Commercial, I mean, it would actually bring a whole bunch more commercial.
More
uses.
commercial uses. It's actually probably a better protection of the environment
To keep it rural.
to keep it rural.
And if they defeat the claim, they defeat the claim.
Yeah.
What would go non-conforming in the little brown triangle there if it went, as it is water and recreation?
I don't think it's so much the uses. I'm not so sure about some of the dimensional lot coverage type questions.
Yeah.
Some of that might be non-conforming in terms of its intensity of what's physically built there. But I think the uses we've pretty much
The uses are all
covered at this point.
Pretty much a match. And the dimensional standards that we're imposing actually fall into a lower level of review than the restrictions that are imposed through the state on the riparian buffer.
This was all one subdivision,
Yeah.
so it's subject to Act 250.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's really probably more problematic from a state
Right.
regulatory perspective.
The regulatory constraints on that whole zoning district are far more restrictive from the state review than they are from local review now, or as we're proposing.
Okay.
And then, again, just at the risk of really nailing it,
I realize that's not always a bad thing, it's just hard for me to nail down in my head what
Yeah.
those uses
And it's-
really are, because it's sort of like a power generating, but it doesn't. not
it's a
power.
substation, that probably predates almost all other uses. The office building where SVE is located and those other uses are probably better understood as part of the pattern that led to the building of modest family homes strung out along Route 30, heading all the way north into Newfane. It's part of that pattern and era of development. It's not a pattern of development that we necessarily want to preserve, and we certainly want to redirect it so that it does take advantage of the major physical asset, which is the river. You could reuse those existing buildings, you could remove those buildings and replace them with other buildings, you can think of other uses that are far more directly connected to the amenity and function of the river, and it's perfectly viable from an economic standpoint. It doesn't have to be those precise uses and those precise buildings.
All right,
Hey,
Okay,
you okay?
I'm good.
10
minutes late,
son,
I'm sorry.
That's fine.
thank you very much, Mary.
Can anybody on this week?
Yeah.
Gonna be around?
I will be.
Why don't you-
It's dirty, so.
And then available?
Yeah.
or-
Well, the funny part is Christine Sun's on a landfill.
Yeah.
So, Liz, do you have any talk to these?
I do.
Okay, so we received a 45-day notice of an intent to file with the Public Service Board for a certificate of public good. The filing date's gonna be around July 12th, so just around the corner. This is proposed to be a 4.0 megawatt solar facility over the Caps landfill, on Old Ferry Road. The modules are gonna face south, and it's gonna take up approximately 25 acres with a 7-foot fence around it. Access is from Glenora Drive. It's said that the lands to the east of it along the river are heavily wooded, and so no views are anticipated, including that from the fishing access down there. It's unlikely to be seen from 91 or Route 5, and in our zoning, it's located in the industrial zoning district. There's going to be cement ballasts for this installation. Most of the ones we've seen in town have just been staked into the ground. But because of the cap on the landfill, they can't pierce the
They
cap,
can't
so it
pierce the
needs
cap.
to be on cement ballasts.
So what would you like the commission to consider with regard to this item?
Well, do you want to answer this?
Yeah.
In matters such as this, the scope of, the planning commission can informally submit a letter to the Public Service Board on its own behalf, detailing any comments that you would like to make. Or you could further, you could consider it in more depth tonight or subsequently, although it's going to be pretty soon. Pass those comments on to the select board. The scope of Section 248 is such that they don't need to take into account the Planning Commission's comments per se. This Planning Commission is not an entity that's recognized before the Public Service Board. The Select Board can make comment, but those comments are narrowly defined. And the threshold for issuing the permit is that the proposed project serves the public good. What the Public Service Board is involved in doing is reviewing under certain specific criteria, and if they find in favor of the applicant, they'll issue a so-called certificate of public good. And the public in that terminology is understood to be the public of Vermont.
Was this, remind me, was this the same one that was used for the parcel, just,
By the marina.
yeah?
Yeah, it's the same body that reviews the application and issues the permit, but this is a larger scale project. And so there'll be some other attributes of the project that are different, and the review will be similarly a little bit different. But in terms of
To
the
be
town's,
characterizing the project as being with very few impacts.
Yeah,
Sorry?
I mean,
The way Sue was describing the project made it sound like there would be very few, certainly visual impacts.
I think that on balance, the kinds of areas that the Planning Commission and even the Select Board would be able to express concerns or comments on would be visual impact or some other.
natural resources.
And in each of those instances, I don't believe this site raises serious questions with that regard.
Do any of my fellow commissioners have any comments?
No.
No, it seems like there's no action needed on this and that they can go through their process.
Okay, so I will advise the town manager that you've contemplated this application and that you have no comment.
I won't even be able to see them from the parking lot, right?
Said that
You probably will see the outline of them, but you know, when you go on the weighbridge, you may see them in your, you know,
Get on
most
the
of,
weighbridge.
Bridge. The big scale, you know, you drive in with your
It's a
truck.
way- it's
something.
cool.
I have people who do that for me.
it's also instructive to set the whole picture, is that in the footnote, it says that under the state of Vermont's comprehensive energy plan, articulated necessary statewide energy generation goals, The project will help Vermont achieve the goal of generating 90% of its energy from renewable resources by 2050.
Right.
There you go.
By some
Yeah.
estimates, this would be the largest solar array project in the state if it's constructed. So we would be making a very substantial
If it's not a
contribution.
landfill, what else would we be doing with that land?
Exactly.
Great.
So it's, so from that standpoint, we feel like
Waste to energy.
that there's very little grounds for us to have concerns about the proposed project as we understand it.
Okay,
Yeah.
moving right along.
Okay.
Which one's next?
Wetland permit application.
Okay, so,
So I think it's Celco, not Cello. Cello. I think it's Celco. It's all right. What do you got?
okay.
This one.
So, no, it's this one. So,
No, it's this one.
oh, okay. So this, no, the Vermont Wetlands is next.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So, I think the DRB approved, I think it was DRB approved a cellular telecommunications tower off of Meadowbrook Road, maybe several months ago. James, I don't know if that rings a bell.
About 4 or 5.
Yeah.
It was winter.
So now they're applying for a Vermont wetlands permit. There is going to be the access road going in. There'll be 384 square foot of wetland impact and 3,273 square foot to the wetland buffer area from the construction of the access road into the site. It's a Class 2 wetland. It functions as flood storage. The wetlands are primarily formed from intermittent spring seeps from either the property or nearby. The access road was cited, basically it's an existing logging road, and so that's what they're continuing to use as the access road. It's going to be about a half mile long and 10 foot wide. There'll be 2 crossings with drainage swales. There won't be any culverts or bridges. And this property is located in our rural zoning district.
It's not paved.
Not
No,
paved, no.
it's not paved. And there's no proposal to pave it.
We currently, in our zoning, we don't currently have any, I mean, I think the wetlands rules are
So
stronger than it.
this would be an access road to what?
A telecommunication, a cellular tower.
To service?
Yeah, so typically there's a small fenced area, 10 by 12 or something like that, around the base of the antenna, and some electronic equipment attached to the base of the antenna, and infrequently, and a power supply to the antenna. And infrequently, technicians have to visit the tower to upgrade it or to reestablish power in the instance of a lightning strike. So there, the impact at this point is, what the review process is to establish that the road can traverse these 2 Class 2 wetlands.
But the road is already?
The road is,
Logging
it's a logging trail already.
So you're not talking about an untouched wetland, you're talking about a wetland that already has a logging trail through it.
Yeah.
And it's basically
It's
permitting
dirt
the use
road.
of that logging trail to access.
Yeah,
Yep.
And they're probably just gonna dump a bunch of.
And it's
dirt
not
on
like
it,
straight
right?
through, it's kind of on,
probably not even.
it's on the edge of the wetland. It's not like it's going straight through. But they have been previously
And it's
disturbed.
going to remain dirt or gravel or?
It'll remain dirt, I should think.
Yeah, with erosion control.
With
So it's
erosion
not
control.
even gonna be built, essentially.
No. So there probably will be a pad where they can park the vehicle immediately adjacent to the tower that they use gravel for or something, but I don't believe that they're necessarily gonna
And-
upgrade the trail.
And they'll be getting a state wetland permit.
That's what they're applying.
That's what they're applying for. We have the opportunity to comment on the state wetland permit process here.
I don't have any comments. Does anyone else?
No.
She said biting her tongue.
Do you want to look at the application?
I would,
Yeah, I'd like to look at the application, and I'd also like to understand what are the other things that they need to actually approve this tower stuck out there in the middle of.
That was already done.
The tower itself has been approved.
So there's 2
Yeah.
choices for telecommunication tower. You can go through the state process or the town board. And this application actually went through the development review board.
How could they go through showed the Development Review Board without an access road. That's odd.
I think that they showed
They
this
showed-
road as the access.
They did show this road as the access, and they showed it as a logging trail to be upgraded.
Don't think they showed any wetlands, so.
Right. And I think subsequent to
That's
that,
correct.
That's correct, they didn't
right,
show.
Correct.
subsequent
I
to
don't remember
that,
seeing
they
it.
mapped it for environmental and other attributes for the state permit and established that there were wetlands that needed to be dealt with.
So I'm not familiar with the area, but I think if there were comments being made, I think it would just be that it sounds like it would be of minimal impact, and probably the comment would be that the preference is to keep it of minimal impact. So Meadowbrook Road's up here, right? Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So,
Okay, James, can you pass that?
Yeah. Go circle so you can see it.
And how big's the property that it's on?
it's a large holding of land in it. The location of the tower is such that it's some distance from any property boundary. I understand from locals that the existing logging trail is used for cross-country skiing in the winter, and that there's the typical Vermont open access approach to the property.
And will that continue?
Yes,
Pretty
Okay,
steep.
any more comments?
thus it's really good for skiing down.
Yeah, it's really steep, it wouldn't be good for much else.
Yeah.
In the way of development, I mean.
Right, just sitting.
And it's, I should also just mention that this process has been reviewed by the Vermont Land Trust, because the parcel is also subject to a conservation easement held by the Vermont Land Trust, and they are agreeable to the project. Because it further enhances the viability of the ownership of the parcel and thus to remain in conservation.
Okay.
Aging.
So H, I'm not even sure really needs to come before you, but we've been notified that an existing telecommunication towers on South Street it currently has 12 panel antennas. That's what it's been approved for. They're replacing 3 of them, and they've just sent us new technical specifications. So it's a de minimis
Rectangles.
impact, so.
It's replacement of,
The rectangles on the
Yes.
triangle?
Yeah.
The little plastic boxes.
3 of them.
Yeah.
that's nice.
Yeah, so consider yourself advised.
Informed.
Okay. Blue sky?
Okay, Blue Sky, this is at the Achille Agway, it's in the commercial zoning district. This is a new telecommunications tower. It'll be a monopole 140 feet above grade level. There'll be a communications compound with equipment shelter, generator. It'll be with a 6-foot fence.
Is this where the temporary one is?
The temporary one is at the BDC, the
Same location.
BDCC Book Press property. This one is actually going to be slightly to the west of it on the Achille Agway property.
How different are they in height?
How different in height?
Yeah.
Don't,
This one is about, I believe, about 20 feet tall.
yeah.
The visual impact over, over the distance from the existing location, it's going to be within a very short distance of the existing temporary facility. And so the visual impact from Putney Road or from this is not going to be dramatically increased. From the side road, which I'm struggling to remember the name of, the one that goes down past Agway,
Out to the paper place?
Wellington.
Road, you'll be able to see the entire tower from the ground as you drive by, but it's, immediately west of the suburban propane gas facility and other industrial facilities, and it's not likely to clash with the surroundings.
Actually, tomorrow is the balloon test between 9 and 1, so if anybody wants to see
Yeah,
how tall it will be,
yeah.
check for the balloon.
I was shocked how well the temporary one blended in. I had a hard time.
I've never
finding
even
it.
noticed it.
No, really? Oh, are you being
No,
sarcastic?
serious.
Yeah, it's really hard to see.
I noticed it, but it's not.
But you're Australian, so.
I'm not sure what the relevance of that is. But with the powers of observation,
I
it's
did
true.
notice the big American flag. Okay.
Well, let's just change the subject now.
Okay, is there any action needed on this?
I don't believe, well, again.
Is this notifying us?
It's one of those weird opportunities where the town has very limited ability to comment. And is it a DOB process?
Couple things,
Yeah.
a couple things on this, I'm sorry, I got distracted by my patriotism. The
Was that what
the
it was?
applicants are actually suggesting that they've given us a checklist with, we recommend approval to the Public Service Board that have concerns, or we disapprove for the following reasons, so.
Did they give the reasons?
But this, if we sign that, we're also waiving the remainder of the 45-day notice period.
No, thank you.
The one thing with this one is that our zoning ordinance requires a 50-foot setback from side property or from property lines for telecommunications towers. This one would only have a 20-foot setback, but that's probably why they chose to go to the state. So we could write a note saying.
It doesn't conform to our zoning.
Right.
Yeah.
Is
I would appreciate
Is that
that.
because, is the reason that it's got the small setback because it's pushed east on the lot?
It's adjacent to the BDCC property, I can show you.
Is it that it's pushed east of the existing temporary facility or actually south?
No, I think it's.
No, I mean, is it
west.
the eastern border
Yeah.
that it's encroaching on what would be our standard setback?
You're asking because you're wondering if they pushed it back.
Because it would make sense to me if
Yeah.
they're trying to get it away from
Yeah, I
where
see
people
where
would
you're
see it. But if it was closer to everything else, I mean.
Sorry, I got confused. I pulled up a map and it said it was the Appalachian Mountain.
That sounds nice.
That's,
It's kind of weird.
You know, we could all, do we have 45 days?
We do have 45 days.
We
Yeah.
could look at this tomorrow, and if anyone has any concerns, we can
yeah.
raise a red flag. So
You just wanted to say that, I can tell.
It's somewhere in here. It's down and it might be somewhere. It's not far.
Temporary ones are really hard to find.
The temporary one is fairly close to the boundary line between Achilles and the book press building.
So if you flip to A1, or you tap the tab A,
We can do it though.
there's a partial plot plan on
Right.
sheet A-1.
This doesn't make any sense. Oh,
Yeah.
Wait a second.
It's pretty hard to read.
I got it. Everybody's calling this the Achilles Agway. Yeah, so it's on here somewhere?
Right.
They do a very good job of identifying it from that map.
No, not particularly.
Is it CSC Mesa? Is that it? Oh, wait, here it is.
See
I got it.
the circle with a box?
Yeah,
Mhm.
I found it. So this
Right.
is here, and the new one would be there, I guess. And that's
All right.
1 inch is 40 feet.
I think they're showing some details
40 feet away.
in the parking lot that might be difficult for you to discern if you're actually there.
I mean, in my opinion, the fact that it encroaches on the standard setback is a good thing in this unusual case, because it means that it's further away from the road, Putney Road, and the businesses and the people.
Okay. Okay.
So are there any other comments?
I'm entertaining a motion to adjourn.
So.
He's out of here.
Second?
Not quite. Is there any other comments? Are we finished with that?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, second.
All in favor?
Bye.
Good night, everyone.